Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Technical Communicator podcast. I'm your host, Miriam, and in this episode, we'll be exploring the relationship between activism and accessibility in the field of technical communication, and how these two concepts can intersect and influence each other. I want to think through how technical communicators can use their skills to also advocate for inclusion and equality through accessible design. This episode seeks to uncover the answer to one central question: how does accessibility function as a form of activism within the field of technical communication? Before getting into that, let's take a look at what it means to define accessibility in this context. Accessibility refers to the design of materials and spaces in a way that people with diverse abilities have access to use them. It can involve anything from web to document design to the inclusion of captions, color contrast, font sizing, and language choices to accommodate those with visual impairments or similar disparities. Namely, to ensure accessibility is to ensure that information and participation are available to everyone, beyond simple technical standards. As technical communicators, our work has the potential to create greater social change. Knowing that we hold the power to contribute to a more equitable world, why wouldn't we make the changes necessary and advocate for a more inclusive design? So, without any more further ado, stay tuned and let's dive in. Jumping into the background and historical context of accessibility. Since this early development of technical and digital communication tools, accessibility has remained an integral part of the field. Technical communicators are often responsible for document design, web design, or the creation of instructional materials. What they all have in common is that they all must meet a certain standard of usability. Over time, the field has grown to implement more accessibility guidelines, such as those outlined by the Americans with Disability Acts, more commonly known as the ADA, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as the WCAG. Both of these frameworks stand to shape how practitioners learn and understand their responsibility for users. They serve also as a reminder that accessibility is more than just a design consideration, being that it also intersects with social justice. Peters and Bradbard show that accessibility is a concept heard in conversation with the ethics behind technical communication, because the discipline itself is grounded in the idea of serving people via clear and effective communication. In their study conducted on web accessibility, they found that web accessibility affects disabled consumers, a potentially significant portion of the population that is growing rapidly due to the aging of baby boomers. Furthermore, when web accessibility is seen as a part of universal design, benefits accrue to all users, not just the disabled. There has also been a shift towards user-centered design, which speaks to this very idea, proving that audiences are diverse and it is the responsibility of a good communicator to anticipate a range of audience needs. Moving on to our next section of the podcast, I want to answer the question: how does accessibility become a form of activism? Well, activism typically starts with awareness in the way that it recognizes inequality and seeks to address it. In this sense, designing for accessibility serves as a more direct way of challenging exclusion in digital contexts. By including captions in videos, using concise language, or structuring output to accommodate screen readers, we have found a way to actively work against the unjust systems in place that marginalize disabled users. In a study conducted on accessibility practices in public transportation, Lucas et al. Found the following. Ideally, both the accessibility indicators and their threshold levels need to be identified in close collaboration with the intended audiences for improved accessibility measures, local policymakers, and other key stakeholders. However, and especially for future levels of accessibility, it is often not feasible to interview people about their perceived future needs. To overcome this problem, they will need to establish to what extent the transport and travel experiences of socially excluded people can be correlated with more readily available standardized measures. This serves as a reminder that every act of communication has its own social and political implications. When we ensure that information is accessible, we are also engaging in advocacy for marginalized users. Further, it shows how certain accessibility practices can be weaponized to redistribute power or even gatekeep access to information. As an example, organizations that keep resources open and accessible to all users are a simple demonstration of how accessibility serves the public. These decisions also show how technical communication principles can fall in line with community-oriented concepts. Moving on to our next section of the podcast, I want to discuss and introduce some scholarly perspectives and voices within the field of technical communication. So, one of them being Kara Poe Alexander. Kara Poe Alexander, in The Usability of Print and Online Video Instructions, discusses the importance of usability and how technical communicators must design materials that are both functional and inclusive for their audiences. Similarly, Walton et al. In Justice in Technical Communication, after the social justice turn, emphasize a similar idea that accessibility holds a direct connection to social justice because of its ability to determine who gets to participate in communication. Looking at this from another angle, we have Natasha Jones and Miriam Williams, and they remind us in Technologies of Disenfranchisement that technical communication can multiply inequalities if we are not intentional about our methods and our audiences. They also encourage practitioners to really consider whether certain design choices reinforce or resist exclusion by stating, "We argue that texts and technologies are not always designed with goodwill in mind, and texts and technologies that are complicit in supporting and promoting oppressive practices have social, cultural, embodied, and material impacts on opportunities and communities. We assert that technical communicators can look for possibilities and opportunities for resisting discrimination through texts." In the next section of the podcast, I want to take a minute to apply and discuss a personal reflection and application of this episode on our course learnings. As I reflect on these ideas, I also think about what they might mean for my own work. In my mind, this course has only emphasized the responsibility of technical communicators to design with people first. In this episode, we have established that creating accessible materials is a way to promote awareness, social justice, and also build a stronger understanding of the way that users can interact with technology. In producing this podcast and this episode, I've also tried to apply these principles through my own intentional design choices and decisions. For one, I've used clear audio, I've used direct and intentional language, I've provided captions, and I've also maintained a pace that's slower and easy to follow for a wider range of audience. But beyond just these technical aspects, I also view accessibility as more of a mindset to guide how I approach communication in general. I find personal value in ensuring that in each and every project that I work on, whether that be for school or my career, it considers how people or who might be excluded and how I can accommodate them. Looking ahead, I plan to continue these practices in my own workplace, where I contribute to the design of websites and other digital marketing materials. When I contribute to web design projects for work, I want to make choices that allow users to navigate my content with clarity. This can include the application of readable text sizing, efficient layouts, alt texts and images, and color contrast applications. I see these choices as a part of the larger commitment to make digital spaces easier to use for people with varied needs, capabilities, and levels of access. This same approach also guides how I think about and view social content and paid media at work. These materials often move fast or pretty quickly, yet they also shape how people engage with information from our clients. I always make sure to include captions for our video content. I always avoid text that might be seen as too dense, and I always try to employ visuals that communicate important information via multiple modes. I am also in the habit of ensuring that ads meet basic accessibility standards so that they don't create barriers for people who rely on the use of screen readers. And by doing this work with intention, I can also help make digital communication more open and more usable for a wider group and a wider range of people. So, moving on to our concluding remarks, I want to make a few takeaways that I hope you gain from this episode. To summarize, accessibility and activism intersect in technical communication through their main shared value of inclusion. As both a requirement for effective technical communication and an ethical responsibility, designing with accessibility can be a form of activism by making information available and usable for all. Above all, if you are left with one takeaway from this episode, I hope that it is a newfound commitment to accessibility. As a technical communicator, you hold the power to influence the inclusivity of digital spaces. So, as you go about your own work, I invite you to think about accessibility as a form of advocacy. With each decision that you make towards building accessibility, you build a stronger environment for effective communication. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode useful, I encourage you to share it and continue exploring how you can incorporate accessibility into your own designs.